Okay, so I think now we are ready. Okay, hello everyone. So I'm gonna start the lecture that I missed on last Tuesday. So this is like a makeup lecture, but we are doing in the right order. So this is the lecture that I was supposed to give on last Thursday. And then one that I gave on last Thursday was supposed to be the one that I should have given on Tuesday. So, okay. So today, I'm gonna I'm gonna continue to teach jQuery, and then like a lot of the stuff that we're gonna cover today is gonna be very relevant to the homework, assignment 3. So I recommend you to work on it. So let's start. So we looked at this counter program where, these sort of counter where you have to press the button to keep track of all the people that goes in like an amusement park, like, or any kind of like, place where you have to wait in line. And we looked at these 4 different concepts. The first thing is selector. Let me check if I can annotate. Selector, which is basically locating the button. And then event, so selector is kind of like, locating your finger to the button. And then event is what happens to the interface. So if this button is clicked or pressed more precisely, that's going to be event. And then mapping is, what happens when so event handler is more of what happened when you press the button. So like when you press the button, it's going to increase the counter. And the mapping between these two is the mapping. Yeah, so those are 4 concepts, and then we did this in pure JavaScript. So we're going to do the same thing in pure, not pure, but like, we're going to do it in jQuery way because it's much more convenient. So, how would I? Okay, so jQuery is, again, useful for interactive apps, and it's good for DOM manipulation, document object model manipulation, and or even CSS. It used to deals with like, a lot of cross-browser compatible issue, which was a big issue back then, but now it's like a little bit of issue than before. A lot of high-level effects. And then we also told that, but like one of the downside is that it does not scale well because like there's some advanced framework that is good for maintenance, like React or Angular. And obviously it's slower than pure JavaScript because it's like has a layer. And then like one line of code could be like, multiple lines of JavaScript code in general. Okay, so, and then I told you that you have to include jQuery file in your code. So there are 2 ways to do it. You can download jQuery .js. Like here, you have min, which means minified. So this means minified, which is basically to reduce the file size. People often minify JavaScript file. The other way to include is just to put a link to external jQuery file. So there's a lot of CDN link. So CDN stands for Content Delivery Network. So if you look up the CDN jQuery link, there's going to be a lot of, script link, script example that's going to give you the source URL to the jQuery library. So there are a lot of different versions, like Microsoft has one, like CDN has one. I mean, there's a dedicated service for CDN. So let me just look up, just for the sake of giving you an example. Oops. Okay, so I would have to clear this, go back to monitor, and then, so let's look at it. CDN jQuery link. If I look at that, you know, W3 schools provide some CDNs. You can download from jQuery.com, but also if you want to include the external one, there's Google provides one, Microsoft provides one, and probably any of these will be fine. Yes, and jQuery.com has like, you know, you can download minified version of it. Like, oh, this is basically CDN link. So yeah, but you can also download it, I hope. jQuery core, minified. Maybe download needs a different kinds of search. Download jQuery, download file. Okay, so jQuery.com has compressed version of jQuery 3.4, or you can use like npm if you're if you are familiar with this. Anyway, okay, so let's go back. So that's how you include it. So let's actually start including it. So let me actually, so we were here. So I added this CDN link, and let's see what it has. Basically, it has probably nothing but this button. Interesting. So it has some event already. So I'm gonna get rid of this guy. And then refresh. Nothing is gonna happen. It's just counter that does not work. It's just like a GUI, like, you know, non-functional GUI at the moment. So let's make it work. So you want to include it. So basic syntax, we will have to first think about the selector. So how you select HTML element in jQuery is very like one of the, you know, reason why you want to use jQuery. It's because it's exactly the same as CSS selector that you learned. So we always use this $sign function. So $sign in parentheses. So this is a function actually. So function and then parentheses, and then this this means that the you know, stuff inside this parentheses is an argument, and then you can specify this CSS selector inside this double quotation, which is basically going to select any HTML elements that you want. So let's try. Let's try go there. So let me actually try this in inspector. I'm going to put it under, because we have a lot of space. I'll make it bigger for you. I'm going to make this one bigger for you as well. So let's try to select elements. So the cool thing is that because we added jQuery in this file, jQuery will be available in this console. So let's try this. How about let's go back to the source code. How about selecting button? So selecting button will be easy. Just you have to specify the tag name. And then once you enter it, you get this JavaScript object, which contains any HTML elements that are selected by this selector. So it has 2 of them. So if you can expand, you can access them by this indexing. So the first one is button reset, and then you see it highlights the button. And the second one is button increment. So you can do things like even button, and then I want to select the first one, and it's going to return that particular element. Obviously, you can do the same thing for the second one. So yeah, and then you can use what is it, like, JavaScript functions like inner HTML, and then it's going to return what's inside this the content inside this tag. I don't know if you remember, inner text is going to return text only. So let's select something else. Let's select div tag. Or we can use this counter ID. So I'm going to copy this guy. And then go back here. So to select an HTML element with ID, by ID you need a hashtag. And I'm going to put counter, and it's going to give me back again, jQuery object that has 1 element in it, which is basically div counter. So if you expand, you have 1 HTML element, which is basically the whole thing. And then you can expand it to see what's inside. There are a lot of property that is readily available for JavaScript element. And then you can, again, access this by indexing in an array. And now it gave us like this HTML element. Of course, you can do inner HTML. It's going to return the whole HTML code inside. Inner text is going to only return the text inside, and it's going to ignore all the HTML code. So yeah, it returns 0, which is this guy, reset, this guy, and increment on the last one. Okay, so that's how you select an HTML element or multiple HTML elements. So yeah, right now div happens to, well, because we used ID, it's going to return only 1. But remember, we used button, and then it gave us 2 elements. Like one set has 2 elements in it. So yeah, so that's basically how you select HTML elements. The other way to do is, like, JavaScript HTML element, you can make it as a jQuery elements by putting $sign function. So how would I do it? Like, one way to describe it is document is like, remember this was a keyword that indicates the whole document. So document is basically this whole thing, but you can make it a jQuery object by this throwing into $sign function like this. And then now it's a set that has document in it. And obviously it's going to have some interesting property. There's 1. We can count how many elements are in the set by using lengths. This is going to be 2 because we have 2 buttons and so forth. So again, basically what I'm trying to say here is that to convert a JavaScript element into jQuery element, you just need to throw JavaScript element into this $ function, and then remember this keyword, which is basically a handle to like, you know, the target, like handle to the object that calls target callback function, or like event handler function, or document. You can change it to jQuery object by just throwing it into $ function. So that's, again, think about these 4 things: selector, event, mapping, event handler function. So now we just covered selector. So what do we do once we select? Okay, so this is basically saying that, hey, jQuery object is not JavaScript object. It's going to return a wrapped set of JavaScript elements, array-like structure. So you cannot use JavaScript function. If you want to use JavaScript function, you would have to, you know, like access each element using this indexing. So you can say these 2 are different and these 2 are exactly the same. Again, this and these are different because this is jQuery and this is pure JavaScript object, but these 2 are same because it's accessing the first element in the set. So by jQuery, you cannot use like JavaScript function or property like inner HTML. You can use these function or property by accessing each element. But, you know, there's going to be jQuery way of doing the same thing. So you won't really have to do these sort of things. So this is not wrong, but like you would not do this. So we're going to talk about event and mapping. So how do we do it? Like the syntax is that, again, we start with selector, and then we put dot, and then we specify event that we want to observe, and then we provide a event handler function handle. Or you can just specify function there. In terms of events, you can just go to this website and look at what kind of events that it has. Like obviously click, change, blur, die, and there's so many events that you can use. So this is one example where, hey, I'm gonna select this button that's that has ID named my button, and then when click event happen, it's gonna call function foo. So this one example give you the checkbox, like let's say there's an input checkbox. If the value, if input checkbox changes, it's going to call this foo function. So event handler function will have this. So this function foo will have this keyword, and then event as its initial, like, you know, default parameter. And then you can figure out what kind of event it was. So this is more another example, like, you know, another explanation on, hey, this part is basically selected elements. And what it means is that an element, the idea of which is my button. And then this part is basically saying that, hey, I'm gonna call this function when click event happen, and then this is the name of the function or name of the event handler function. So in English, it means that the element that has my button for its ID will call function foo when a user clicks it. This code assumes that there is a foo declared before this line. So again, you can do this before. I mean, like you cannot do this without foo function declared. So let's try this. I'm going to go back to counter app. I'm going to make this button a little bit bigger by putting it in their header. So that we can see better. Okay, that's cool. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to put a script. And then I'm going to say, I'm going to select, let's work on the increment button. So I'm going to select the increment button for now. Increment, and then dot, and then I'm going to make it respond to click event. And then here, I need to specify a function. So how do I do it? I can specify a function in advance. So let foo equal to function, which is basically going to alert and click. That's all it does, but you know, we can have initial parameter event, and then let's put a debugger so that we know we're going to stop the program at this point. And then I need to specify this function. So now it basically saying when this function is clicked, it will call this foo function. So you can do this, or it is exactly, another way to do exactly the same thing is simply put the whole function inside this. So if you code like write program in JavaScript, these sort of things happens a lot because again, function is an object. Basically, it is an object that is passed to this click function. So these two are same. So let's say, let's differentiate these two functions by saying that this is click 1, this is click 2, and then save it. Okay, so let's refresh. And then press increment, and nothing happened. Why is that? So we can go to source and then put a breakpoint in any place that we want. Let's put a breakpoint here and then refresh the page. Now we got stopped here. I'm going to move on with this step over. Now foo is available. So if you do foo, it's going to call this alert function, which is exactly what we tell it to do. And then here, just moved on, but I want to check this one first. So let's use this selector and then find the element and then realize it has nothing. Why is that? So length is 0. And then because there's no element, I cannot access anything. So the reason why this is happening is because in JavaScript, the order matters. So here you can see that this function is called before even we have this button declared in HTML file. So this is not going to work because by the time that JavaScript runs this function, we do not have button yet. So what should have happened was that this should have happened here at the end of the page. So let me actually save it and refresh. Now let's check it. Okay, so now clicking this button successfully called this foo function. So you can watch the stack, like foo is being called, but it's dispatched by jQuery, which is basically like we're running this guy, like, you know, like jQuery is running this event handler function. So debugger is going to stop the JavaScript program. I'm gonna let it move. And then the other interesting, well, what's gonna happen is that I'm gonna get this click one alert. Once I click it, now it's gonna stop at this point because we have two handler functions. So it's not going to overwrite event handler function. It's just going to keep add to the stack. So now increment button has two event handler. One of them is foo. The other is this function that we defined here. So if we keep moving on, it's going to give me click two, which is basically this line, which is different from click one. So yeah. So let's just simplify by getting rid of this and then get rid of debugger and refresh. When I press increment, it's simply going to give me alert. Okay, so that has some interactive behavior. So this is jQuery mapping using event handler function, but you can think of different things, like, you know, instead of clicking, you can think of different events. So let's look at something else. How about mouse leave? So let me click this guy, and then description says, bind an event handler to be fired when the mouse leaves an element, or trigger that handler on one element. Okay, so it's going to need one parameter, which is handler, although there are different kinds of like different types of declaration, but I'm going to use this one. So handler is basically just a function. So let's go back to the code. Instead of click, I'm going to say mouse leave, and then save it, and then refresh it. So let's try this. So I'm going to place my mouse, like, hopefully you can see the mouse. I'm going to maybe make the mouse bigger. How do I make it bigger? Cursor. I'm thinking it's part of the accessibility. Mouse option. Nope. Okay, so cursor size. Okay, cursor size, now it's large, that's good. Okay, so I don't know if you saw it. I'm moving in to the button, I'm leaving the button now, and then I get this nice alert. So how should I do it this time? Moving into increment button. And then if I leave this button in different ways, I get this nice alert. And obviously you can do a different thing. Oops, that's too big now. Mouse enter was another event, which is going to be fired when I move mouse cursor into the button. Okay. So hopefully that makes sense. It was too large. Okay, so that was jQuery mapping. We looked at click and we looked at mouse enter, but you can think of different kinds of event. And then I gave you some example here: click, key press, key up, key down. So key press is a combination of key down and key up. Like if you press a keyboard key, it's going to be key down. If you release your finger, it's going to be key up. Focus, blur is basically focusing on input element. And then if you leave the focus, that's blurring. Hover, load, mouse down, mouse move, mouse up, it should be up. And mouse enter, mouse out, mouse over. Again, check out this particular page that's going to list all the events that you can use in jQuery. So again, let's look at this counter application, which is not exactly what we wanted to do. Like what we wanted to do is pressing this button should increase this guy, right? So let me go back to click. And then we gotta increase something. So let's create a variable called counter and start running from 0. And what I'm gonna do is press counter and then maybe print it out in the console, like the last time that we did. So if I refresh, let's get the console. So if I keep pressing, I can see the counter value is incrementing, which is exactly what we wanted, except the fact that it does not change the counter interface. So we are just updating the model. We're not updating the view. So how should we update the view? To know that, we would have to know how to manipulate HTML elements. And then here, I'm going to give you 3 different ways to manipulate elements. So one is adding new elements. And the second one is revising elements. There's more revision. And the last one is removing elements. Okay, so let's start with addition. So in addition, this is like a typical syntax where you, again, every jQuery statement start with selector, and then you can append, which means that you're going to add HTML at the end of a content within a selected element. So you're going to add a child of an element. So let's select, what should we select? Maybe we should select this guy and then maybe add something at the end. So let's try that. I'm gonna go here. Let's select this guy, the counter. And then append HTML code, and then I can just simply write down HTML element code. So I'm going to say h2, click, h2. So I saved it, and let's check it out. So if I click it, it's going to keep adding this nice header element. And if you can hear me clicking, but basically I can click a lot of them. So that's append. What is prepend then? Prepend is going to add in the beginning of that content. So prepend, append, the only difference is that the location, obviously after, before, it's going to be adding HTML elements after selected elements. So now it's not going to be child anymore. It's going to be probably sibling is the right word. So after, if I do this, so it's pretty much similar to append, except that it's going to add outside this div element. Similarly, before it's going to add element before this. Okay, so these were 4 ways to add new elements. Now let's revise it. So again, remember that in jQuery, getter and setter has exactly the same function. If you provide parameters, it's going to work as setter's function. If you don't provide anything as a parameter, it's going to work as a getter. So here I provided 4 different things: text, which is going to return, or we can set text content of selected elements. HTML is going to be return or setting the HTML code. Val is the value of input form or value property of the HTML element. And if you have any property that are not predefined, like as a function, you can use prop function, and you can probably get, like, any kind of property or attributes in HTML elements. So let's use text. So let me actually go to counter and then look at this code. So let me select increment button, increment, and then to text. Basically, it's going to return text. HTML has, okay, so it's going to return the whole tags inside this. So what if I selected this counter, which is the container that has the whole 3 different things, and it's going to give me a long list of HTML tags. If I use text, it's going to give me only the text. But again, these are getter, but I can use it to set the value of either text or HTML. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the text to increment and set to something random. Okay, so something random. So if I run this, now you saw H1 is gone, and then you got this new label. How about if I put H1, H1, if I enter this, it's going to add H1 as a text because I'm using text function. If I were to do it to make it as a tag, I would have to use it HTML. And then now it's going to add this whole as an HTML tag. So again, you can see that if I provide parameters, it's going to work as a setter. If I don't, it's going to work as a getter. Okay, so what do we want to do? What we want to do is actually, once we click this increment button, it would be great to update this part. So let's go back to code, and then this is basically a span element, has ID called counter value. So instead of counter, I'm going to select counter value, and then set the text to the counter value that we have. Again, JavaScript is loosely typed program language. So even though this is a number, it's going to convert it into string. So let's save it and refresh. And then if I keep clicking it, I get this nice error because I have a typo obviously in my function variable name. So it should have been counter. Saved it. Okay, so let me click it. Now it's incrementing the value and the view at the same time. Okay, so that's that. And let's look at the reset button. Let's implement the reset button. So what do we want to do when you press reset? We just want to set the counter value to 0 and update the counter value in the UI. So let's do that. So how do I do that? So what I'm going to do is start from scratch. Again, I need to select an element. This time I'm going to select this guy. So reset, and I'm going to map this button's clicking event to a function, which is basically going to set the counter value to 0, and then update the counter value element to whatever counter value is at the moment, which is basically going to 0. Okay, so if I refresh, increment works, and reset button does not work because, why? Because I did not specify right selector. I need to have hashtag. Okay, so working. If I put reset, it's going to go back to 0. Again, you can put a breakpoint here. And reset, it's going to stop at this point. And again, remember this keyword. So you can use console to evaluate any variable that is available at the moment. So if I put this is going to be this particular reset button. So this dot ID is going to be reset. This dot inner text is going to be reset, which is basically label. We can differentiate it by having capital letter in the beginning so that we don't, it's different from the ID. Again, if I reset, it's going to stop where I set the breakpoint, console, this, and this dot text, inner text. It's going to give me the label. So yeah, so counter is working. Great. So that is that. Again, you can use value prop to access any attributes or value that is specified in an input form. So for example, in assignment 3, you have new task input form, right? Like how do you get the actual data from the input form? You can use this val function. Okay, so another way to manipulate HTML element is to add class or remove class or toggle class. So basically, it's going to add class property. So, or remove class property or toggle. So let's check it out. Let's do an experiment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a class called what should I do? Clause border container. This is my class name. Basically, it's going to do is border equal to 3 pixel solid red. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use maybe this counter value. And then whenever it's hovered, it's going to call a function, which is basically going to add toggle this new class called border container. So again, here, I don't, so one thing that I could do is I can select this same thing, but it is a computation that you have to search this particular element. The cool thing is that you already have handle to this counter value, which is basically this. And then I have to throw that into this $sign function because I want to use jQuery function. And then I'm going to use event function called hover. And then what it's going to do is call this function. And then what this function does is basically add, so basically I'm doing the same thing here and here. Like I shouldn't do that. What I want to do is actually toggle the class border container. So what's going to happen is that if I hover over, if I hover my mouse hover the element, it's going to add this border container. And then if I hover it again, it's going to toggle, which means that it's going to add and remove, and keep alternating. So let's try this out. So if I hover, you see, hover, 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 hover. That's pretty cool. Can I do this for everything? So this is all selector. Ooh, yay. That's pretty cool. Okay, so but let's go back to the original one, counter value only. Okay, so that was, but you can use like toggle is basically toggles between adding and removing classes, but you can only do one way, like add class or remove class. And then in the assignment 3, you know, when, for example, when things are complete, you would have to add a particular class so that it will appear in red, or in green or red. If it's overdue, it has to be in red. If it's complete, it has to be in green. So like adding a class or toggling a class will be useful for those stuff. Of course, you can just use like a CSS code, and you can add an inline CSS code. So let me actually create one more button saying random, and then random, what I'm going to do when I click this button is going to be create the background color of this whole document with random color. So how would I specify that behavior? First, again, you want to select an element. So what is the element that you want to trigger this function? We haven't looked at it, but like if you go, oops, if you check out the counter, and now we have one more button. I don't know why it stopped here. The random button does not do anything, although all the other button works. So random button, I'm gonna select this guy, which is basically hashtag random. And then whenever it's clicked, it's gonna run this function. And then in this function, let's check, set the background color of the document to random with a random color. So again, we are trying to use CSS. So I'm going to select the body because body is the whole thing. And then add a CSS code. Obviously, I don't know anything about this function, so let's go find out what this is. jQuery, CSS, and then you have an API documentation. So CSS, get the computed style property for the first element in the set of matched element. So you can specify, like again, this is getter, but we want setter, right? So this is setter. So CSS property name value. So what is the property name of background color? CSS background color. And then you can see it's background dash color. So I'm going to come back to the code. And then first argument should be the name of the property. And the second argument should be the value of it. For now, let's change it to red just for the sake of checking if it's working. Okay, counter, refresh. If I press random, it is supposed to change the background to red. Yes, so okay. So now everything is in red. How would I make it random? So if you remember, this has to use color value. So CSS color value, there are multiple ways to represent it. You can represent it with RGB function, red, green, blue needs to be a number between 0 and 255, or you can specify a percentage. Yeah, and the hex code. So let's try to use random generator. So again, I don't know the random generator in JavaScript, so let's look it up. Random number generator in JavaScript. So it has a random method. So we would have to use this guy, and then it's going to return a number, random number between 0 and 1, which is inclusive. It includes 0 and is not going to include 1, which is fine for us. So I'm going to have to generate 3 random number because we need red, blue, green. But then the tricky thing is that it's going to generate a random number between 0 and 1. So what we want is 0, like an integer number between 0 and 255. So let me go back to counter, and then we can always use this console to test our idea. So I'm going to say math random. It's going to give me some number between 0 and 1 all the time. Again, in console, like up arrow is going to give you the history of commands that you typed. So I'm using that. So it's how do I get the number between 0 and 255? One quick way to do it is to simply multiply 255, and then it's never going to go over 255 because like maximum value cannot be 1. So, and then maybe I would have to take out this the decimal numbers. So how would I do that? Like round JavaScript. Okay, so it has math.round. Okay, so this is exactly what we want. So let's go back to counter. So if I put math round, it's going to give me some number between 0 and 255. Okay, so that's exactly what I want. I'm going to grab this guy and go back and then use it to generate red, blue, and green. And now we have 3 different numbers. And then instead of red, we would have to say, hey, I'm going to use RGB function. And then first parameter is going to be red. And I need comma, close. And then second is going to be RGB green. We need comma. And the last one is going to be blue. And we don't need comma here. So let's print out this guy before we test it. So I'm going to say alert random RGB, so we can check the string that was generated. So I saved it, refresh. If I click it, it's going to give me this nice RGB code. Every time I click it, it's going to be different. Okay, so now instead of alert, I just need to set it. Set the background color property of CSS of the body element. So I'm going to comment this out, refresh. Okay. So we can create this nice random effects whenever I click it. Okay, so that's CSS. But again, unfortunately, we're not going to use CSS in our assignment 3. So don't use them. One thing that I should have shown you is that how clicking this button is going to change the HTML dynamically. So you can see the style property that is added on the fly. So if I keep clicking it, it's going to keep changing. This part is going to change if I keep generating random numbers. Okay, so obviously I'm getting sleepy. So let's move on. So last one is removing element. So removing element is going to be useful when you want to render certain thing from scratch. So in assignment 3, whenever there is an update in data, let's say you completed an item, you just want to render the whole thing from scratch because, just dealing with the difference is like complicated. So what could happen is that, hey, I'm gonna remove everything and then I'm gonna add a new thing. So remove could be useful. So let's create a remove button. Which is basically going to remove the whole button maybe. So again, another iteration of creating event handler or event mapping. $sign and selector. I'm going to use hashtag because I'm using ID. Remove dot click, and then it's going to call this function. And then what the function is going to do is use one of these functions. So selector.remove is going to remove the selected elements. So what should we remove? Can we remove all the buttons maybe? Okay, so let's check that out. So if I press remove button, it's going to remove the whole thing. So basically, this is remove function is going to remove the selected elements. The other thing that you should have seen is empty. Empty is basically removing the whole children of an element. So right now, in our case, let's get rid of children of the counter or div element. So I'm going to say div and empty. And then it's not going to delete the div element because it's going to delete empty what's inside of it. So if I do this, oops, where's the counter? If I press remove, now it's going to remove everything inside this div element, and even including the counter value GUI. Okay, so I guess that's it. Is there anything interesting that we can do? What if I do this instead? It's going to remove the object that is calling this function, which is basically this guy. So if I do this, oh, it's going to delete this button. Oh, I should have done remove instead of empty. Now it's going to delete the entire self. Refresh, click, refresh, click. Okay, so I think that's pretty interesting, but somewhat useless counter. So manipulating jQuery elements, there are a lot of different things you can do. Let's say like stuff that you can do is available here. If you go to link, there's some lots of functions that you can do. Like you can add a class, you can insert elements after something, you can add an attribute, you can add a property. I think we had property somewhere. Okay, property. Oh, other thing that I should have shown you is like hiding and showing. So removing empty is basically removing the entire thing in the code. So it's irreversible. So if you look at this remove button, if I, again, you can see it's available here. If I click remove, now it's gone. It's like you cannot just have it back. Instead, if we use hide, what it's going to do is it's going to keep the code, but it's just going to make the display none, which means that, so this is the element. If I click remove, it's going to hide it, which is basically adding display colon none, which is, you know, basically same as making it invisible. Yeah, so how about maybe we could say this is toggle now, and then I'm going to create a class named toggle button. Well, not necessarily it's a toggle button that needs to be toggled. So I'm going to add this class to here, here, and here. And then what's going to happen is that I'm going to select the whole buttons, like all the elements that has class named button toggled, and then toggle them. So let's see what this is going to do. Again, now this is not like the object that is calling this function. It's something different, which is the other three buttons in this case. And then this one has no class. So if I refresh, what's gonna happen if I press toggle? And then I can toggle actually three buttons by clicking it. Once I click it, it's gonna hide. If I click it again, it's gonna show, which is basically what toggle does. It's gonna keep alternate between show and hide. Oops. Okay, so, and you know, you can do, what can you do? You can have some animation or effects. Here, you should have some animation. Animate or effects. There are a lot of different effects. Animate, clear queue, fade in. So let's try and fade out. So instead of toggling the buttons, let's try fade out. And what is going to happen? If I click it, you saw I'm refreshing. If you click it, these three is going to fade out quickly. I wonder if there's any value parameter that I can change the timing. So, okay, so duration, I can specify the duration. And then you have a complete function. So the first argument is that a string or number determining how long the animation will run. And then default is 400, which is basically 400 millisecond. And let's say I'm going to make it really long by saying fade out 5 seconds is going to be 5,000. And, you know, like any argument that is inside this bracket, it means optional. So by default, it's 400. The second one is, you know, complete function callback. So it's going to be a function that is going to be fired when the event was done. So I'm going to say 5 seconds. Again, I want to add a function handler as event handler, which is basically going to say alert, hey, I am completely hidden now. So this is going to be fired when this fade out animation is complete. I'm gonna save it, counter. Again, toggle is not a good name. So let's say fade out. Refresh. So if I click it, it's gonna take 5 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And now, once it's done, it's going to call this callback function or event handler function, and then we can get this alert message. And I get it for 3 times because 3 buttons disappeared. Okay. Does that make sense? Like, because this is going to have 3 elements inside this selector, and then we are running fade out effects, and then we are running this event handler function for each 3 elements in it. Okay, so what else should we do? One thing we can possibly do is to create an input. So I want to create an input named duration. So we can specify the duration of fade out. So type is going to be text. And refresh. Now I have this nice input field. Let's say I'm going to say 6,000, and then we're going to use the number for the duration of fade out effect. So what I need to do, instead of 5,000, I would have to get the value of this guy. So I don't know if you remember that there was a function called val. So I'm going to select this new input field using $. I'm going to use this ID, duration, and then instead of inner text, I'm going to use val because it's input field. And obviously, this is going to return a string, but string will be converted to a number automatically because it's loosely typed. So, and then, okay, so let's refresh. So let's say 20 millisecond. It's pretty quick. How about 2,000? Oops. How about 2,000 if I fade out? 1, 2. Huh, that's pretty quick. So we go to debug, let's say 10,000, but it's still quick. Maybe because, let's put a debugger here. Something is wrong. Fade out. Now it's stopped here, and I can evaluate anything. So let's get this guy. Now it's undefined, obviously because I didn't use hashtag. If I use hashtag, it's nothing because I didn't specify anything. So let me specify 5,000 and then fade out. It's going to stop here. Now you're using this hashtag. And if I go to console and then evaluate this thing, it's going to return me 5,000, which is basically the value that this input form has. So let me get rid of debugger and see if it makes any changes. So if it was 0, it's going to immediately hide it. I don't know if it was immediate. If it was 10,000, it's immediately hidden. So there is something wrong still. So let's check it out. So I'm going to go to source and I'm going to add a breakpoint and refresh. I'm going to put 10,000, press fade out. Now it got stopped. And then let's check out this value in the console. It's 10,000. But then what is happening here? So maybe you have to change it to numbers. Maybe let's do hard code number just for the sake of testing. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay. So hard-coded number works. Let duration be this guy, and then specify the variable. Let's call it dir. So here, I'm going to evaluate dir, and it's empty. So I'm going to refresh, and then say it's going to be 10,000. Now dir is 10,000. But I guess it has to be converted to number, interestingly. So now I got stopped. Dir, oops, is nothing. You would have to type something. $10,000, fade out. It's gonna give me dir, and then I would have to convert it to number. Dir. So let's try this. Basically, it's a cast function. So let's say 10,000 again, fade out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, so it takes 10 seconds. Let's try one more time. Refresh. 3 seconds. 1, 2, 3. Yes. Okay. So hopefully everyone got the idea. Basically what I tried to do is to use this effect. But again, like we're not going to use any effect in our homework. What we are actually going to use is some function called document ready. So again, like we saw, the order matters. Like, you know, what do I mean by that? You have to declare variables before using it. You have to declare a function before you're using it. You cannot select an element that is not rendered yet, like, you know. So it has to come after HTML. It has to, jQuery needs to be included to be able to use jQuery. So let's give it a quick test. So this is the function that I created. So it has a script. So we have an alert named alert after jQuery. Oh, okay. So this is alert before jQuery, and I have 4 buttons, button 1 to button 4. And when you press button 1, it's going to alert. Button 1 says hello. And then if you press button 2, it's going to say button 2 says hello. And there's button 4 inside this weird function that we're going to talk about later. But let's skip this for now. The third one is at the end of the page. Button 3 says hello, and then you can run this. You can run this alert window whenever you run, like, load the page. So let's check this out. So alert before jQuery, alert after jQuery, alert at the bottom of the page, and then our document is ready. So let's do button 1, so it does nothing. Button 2 does nothing. Button 3, it gives me something. Button 4 gives me something. So why button 1 and 2 did not work? So let's go back to the code. So the reason why button 1 did not work, and it's because its jQuery syntax is not going to work because it's before this including jQuery. So $sign is not available at the moment, but $sign is available from this moment, which is why now we have a syntax highlight in this editor. So here, button 2 did not work, not because jQuery was not there, jQuery is there, but because it cannot select button 2, and button 2 was not rendered yet. So button 2 is later in the file, but it's trying to find button 2 and add an event handler, but it cannot find anything here, so it fails to run this click event handler function. We're going to talk about this later. Button 3 worked because by the time that it specified event handler, button 3 was specified, and then you can just roll the thing, call this alert function. So you can say this is the first thing that runs, but because jQuery is not there, this part did not run. This is the second thing that runs after running jQuery. So jQuery worked, but then this selector did not work because button 2 was not rendered yet. Again, third one worked fine because we have jQuery available, and then button 3 was available. So button 3 had no error. Button 4, even though it looks like it shouldn't work because it's before HTML file, it is actually inside the function called document ready. So let me clarify what this is. So let's simplify this. So I'm going to say let foo is equal to function, which is basically what was inside this parenthesis, and then this is foo. So what this document ready is going to run this function foo when the document is ready, which just means that the whole document is loaded or rendered. So by the time that you run foo, it's gonna be after this, like rendering the whole HTML file. So let me actually change this guy to 1, 2, and then I'm gonna add this guy in like 3 inside this foo function. Then now this is gonna be 4. And then if you can think of order of alert, if I refresh, 1 is the first one, 2 is the second one. It is supposed to be, 4. It is supposed to be 4 here. Let me refresh. So 1 is the first one, 2 is the second one, 4 is the third one, and 3 is the last one. The reason why 3 runs at the latest is because it's going to run, this whole foo function is gonna be fired when the document is ready, which means document is ready when browser complete the whole thing. So this part runs before whatever inside this document ready. Okay, so document ready is useful to make sure that all the HTML elements are available and all the page loading is done. So using document ready, you can specify any JavaScript code on top of the page, because it's going to, obviously you would have to have jQuery element, like jQuery function included in your HTML file. But once you run document ready function, that function will be fired after all the elements are rendered. So this is, again, document itself is JavaScript element, but we are making it a jQuery element by using $sign function. And then ready is like event function, and then this is the event handler. Okay, so last thing, again, like jQuery selector is going to always return wrapped set. A wrapped set is basically array-like structure, and then each function is useful to iterate over all the elements inside this selector. So let's say you have 100 button, and then you want to have some sort of behavior that is very similar to each other, but like different because like the button name is different, for example. So what if you want like different behavior per each element? And like one way to do it is like, specifying event handler one by one. It's gonna work, but then you can do it in batch using this each function, kind of like a for loop or iterator. So one thing that we can do here, let's go back to the counter example. So counter jQuery. So we have 4 buttons today, or 5 buttons. I'm gonna select every button, and then call each. And then each is going to take 1 argument, and then that's going to be event handler or callback function. So let's go to each API documentation. So each method is specify a function to run for each matched element. So, and then it's going to take two arguments. First one is index, second is element. So I'm gonna say, hey, first one is index, second one is element. What I'm gonna say, I'm gonna say a console message, hey, and say button is clicked. The name of the button is something, but here I'm gonna put index. So inside the parentheses, let's say I want to specify the index, so I'm gonna close the double quotation and then put I there. And name of the button is the element. So element is the element that is being iterated over. So I'm going to say lm dot text. By the way, lm dot text is not going to work because this is a JavaScript object. I would have to make it as a jQuery object. Okay, so I'm going to save it. Refresh. Now, what happened is that all the buttons that exist in this web page is going to have this function called, which is basically going to have 5 console message. So let's go to look at the console. Obviously, I have an error. 67. I don't need like a semicolon here. Okay, so interestingly, 1, 2, 3, 4, because we have 4 buttons, right? So these messages are printed, but like basically it is saying, hey, button is clicked, but like we haven't clicked the button. So what should really happen is that I should have just added another event handler per each of these guys. So I'm gonna say, hey, whenever this element is clicked, I'm gonna call this function, and then this function is going to print the message. Now, instead of lm, I'm gonna say this. And obviously, so this is exactly the same as lm in this case. And I wonder if I can be accessible. And I'm pretty sure it is because it's like under the same scope. So let's try this. Now it doesn't do anything, but if I click it, I'm gonna say, hey, button 1 is clicked. The name of the button is increment. If I press reset, I can see. And if I press random, and then you can see the stuff that I'm doing. Okay, so let's just hard code the duration for now. And then we don't need input anymore. So remember, now what I did was here, I'm using this selector button and I'm iterating over each element. And then once I have handle to each element, I'm gonna create a click event handler for each button, which is basically gonna do the same thing, but like I can vary information using this I and its target, its handle, and then text is different. The other thing that could have happened is that, hey, instead of this, I'm just going to I'm just going to directly specify click event. Obviously, click event is not going to pass index and LM. It's going to pass event, although I'm not going to use it. So I is not going to be available, but this text will be still available. So let's check this out. And you can see that now we have almost like a history of all the button click. Okay. So let me refresh. Now you see like it's increasing the number because it's exactly the same thing. Okay. So that was that. So this was the example that I gave you. So let's update the counter. What I would like you to do is like create your own counter, like that has reset button, and then increment button, and you can get rid of the other two buttons. But let's create a text area, and which is going to basically like print out all the interaction history with timestamp. So I'm going to use timestamp, and then I'm going to add a history inside text area. So let's get rid of random and remove for now. And then after div, I'm going to create text area. And then ID is going to be history. And then for now, I got nothing. And then increment reset should be there, but I don't need any of these for now. But whenever button is clicked, what I'm going to do is, hey, button is clicked, instead of console log, I want to change the value of text area. So text area, we would have to change the text area value to this message. So let's check out the counter. Now we have only two buttons, but we have a text area here. So if I increment, you can see now it's going to print out this guy. But what I want is like accumulated history. So let me actually put this text area inside this div, first of all, so that it will be in the center. So save it. Oh, it's here. Okay. I'm going to put it in a new div then, so that it will have a line break. Okay, now we have this guy. Let's change the width to maybe 80%. 80% is not working. Style. Okay. And height is 200 pixel. Maybe some space. So it's just changing its value, but what I want is incremental, accumulating things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the value of existing string, current val. Again, getter is exactly the same as setter. So I'm going to say get this guy and then add this new line on top of the existing value. And let's see what happens. Okay. It's doing something. But what I really wanted was maybe adding a line break. And then maybe add a timestamp. Timestamp is going to be new date. How do I get time? How do I get time now in JavaScript string? So get hour, get minute, get month. So new date is going to create date object. So let's get this guy. Full year, get months +1 because I guess it's going to start from 0 and then it's going to get date. And then I can get time as well. So I'm going to get this guy. And then get this time too. And then we can use this guy directly. Date. Obviously, we will like some space and some more space between date and time. And then saved it. And refresh. Oh, nice. Okay, so I get this nice timestamp as if it was like a history of this counter. I don't know why it has initial 2 line breaks. I know why, because it's whatever inside this 2 thing. So I'm going to see there's nothing in it initially. So, okay. It's adding the line break when I start. So how about don't add any line break, but add it at the end. So that it's gonna start from the very first line. So now I have a counter that has interaction history. Oh, so you don't have to use each function. So I would like you to work on this particular counter that has two buttons, where increment works, reset works, using jQuery, and then have this interaction history. I'll get rid of this guy, and then post it to the Canvas quiz. So Canvas quiz is going to be available until next Tuesday, so you have time. But I would like everyone to complete this and then post the code, and then we're gonna test the code and then review it. I mean, like grade each one of them based on its functionality. And also I'm gonna check whether you guys used jQuery or not. So to get full credit, please use jQuery. And I guess that's it. Okay, so I have no idea how much time I spent to create this video, but I have a feeling that I spent more than 2 hours. If that's true, probably I would have to have one more lecture recording next time. But whatever I cover today is going to be just enough for your assignment 3. So hopefully this will help. And then we'll continue. And we're gonna cover a few more things. And then next, after next week, we're gonna move on to little bit of server-side programming, and then we may want to do a little bit of Node.js. Okay, well, thank you very much, and I'll see you next week. And it we'll maybe just keep doing online because of this coronavirus outbreak, but we'll see whether if there's going to be official announcement or not. All right, thank you. See you guys.